The planet was a quiet, dusty ball of rock. The sky was a pale orange color, and the wind blew softly, moving dust from one empty place to another. There was a small building on the surface, a research station for studying alien history. It was not an important place. Inside, a man named Minsu was working. He was a human, an engineer. His job was to understand old machines that other species had left behind. Right now, he was deep inside the broken engine of a very old mining vehicle. His hands were covered in black grease. His clothes, a one-piece suit called coveralls, were stained with oil and dust. A woman named Jihi sat at a computer screen nearby. She was a scientist who studied alien biology. She watched the information on her screen, but she also listened to Minsu work. She was used to the sounds he made, the clank of metal, the hum of his tools, and his quiet muttering when a part was stuck. "This locking ring is completely fused," Minsu said, his voice echoing slightly from inside the engine. "The species that built this really didn't want it taken apart or put back together," Jihi replied without looking away from her screen. The station manager calmed. He said, "We have a visitor. A big one. From the Galactic Concord." Minsu slid out from under the engine. He sat up and wiped his face with a cloth which only spread the grease around. "The Concord? What do they want out here?" "We're the farthest thing from polished and perfect they're likely to find." They didn't say, but their ship landed 10 minutes ago. "They'll be here soon." The Galactic Concord was the great civilization of the galaxy. They were a people of advanced technology, clean lines, and quiet order. Humans were newer members, and most Concord saw them as a little rough, a little too loud. Soon, the main door to the workshop slid open with a quiet hiss. The station manager walked in first, looking very nervous. Behind him came the visitor. The being was tall and slender. Their skin had a soft, silvery shine, and they moved with a smooth, graceful motion. They were a Valen, a founding species of the Concord. Their name was Lun. Lun's clothes were a simple, sleek robe of silver gray. They looked around the workshop, and their calm, large eyes showed a flicker of something. It was not disgust, but maybe confusion. The room was full of chaos to them. Tools on benches, scattered machine parts, the smell of oil and metal. The station manager spoke, his voice shaky. "Minsu Jihi, this is Emissary Lun from the Galactic Concord. They have a request for you." Lun stepped forward. Their voice was soft and musical. "You are Minsu, the specialist in asymmetric, high-impact kinetic systems?" Minsu stood up, still holding his greasy cloth. "That's a fancy way of saying I fix things that smash into other things." "Yeah, that's me." "This is Jihi. She keeps me from accidentally poisoning myself on alien bacteria." Jihi gave a small, polite nod. Lun's head tilted. "Your profile states you have a unique understanding of pre-Conquered technology, specifically from the so-called Titan era." Minsu's casual attitude faded. He became more serious. "The Titans? The first ones, the ones who built the first star roads? Everyone studies the Titans. What about them?" "The Conquered possesses a singular, complete suit of Titan battle armor," Lun explained. "It is our most prized historical artifact. It represents the peaceful, philosophical beginnings of our civilization." Minsu and Jie exchanged a quick look. The idea of the Titans being purely peaceful was a popular story the Concord told, but most human researchers who looked at the evidence had their doubts. Things built for pure philosophy rarely had so much armor plating. Lun continued. "The armor's internal power system is failing. Our finest engineers have attempted to stabilize it, but their methods are too refined. The systems are too ancient, too robust. We cannot reactivate them without causing damage. We need an expert who thinks in a less linear way." "You need someone who isn't afraid to hit it with a hammer," Minsu said, a small smile on his face. Lun's silvery skin seemed to flicker. "We would prefer you did not literally hit it with a hammer. But the principle is not entirely incorrect. We need you to rebuild it, to make it whole again. You will, of course, be handsomely compensated." Minsu was quiet for a moment, thinking. He looked at his own hands covered in the grime of the old mining rig. He thought about the perfect, clean museum where the Titan armor was probably kept. He thought about Conquered engineers who used light and sound to fix things who never got their hands dirty. He then looked directly at Lun. His eyes were calm and steady. "Okay," Minsu said. "I have a question before I agree. Just so we are clear from the very start." Lun waited, patient and polite. "Please ask." Minsu took a small step forward. Do you want mine cleaned or bloodstained? The silence in the workshop was sudden and heavy. The station manager looked like he might be sick. Ji pressed her lips together, trying not to show any expression. Lun was completely still. The question made no sense to them. It was illogical. It was messy. It was, they thought, another human oddity. I do not understand the query, Lun said finally. Their voice still soft, but now a little cold. The Titan armor is a historical treasure. It must be restored to its original pristine condition for preservation and display. That is the task. Rebuild the ancient armor. Minsu held Lun's gaze for a second longer, then he nodded slowly. He saw that Lun did not understand the question at all. They heard the words, but the meaning was lost on them. All right, Minsu said, his voice back to its normal tone. We'll do it. When do we leave? Immediately, Lun replied, seeming relieved to be back on familiar ground. Our ship is ready. We will provide you with all the necessary data during the journey. As Lun and the nervous station manager left the workshop, Jihye turned to Minsu. Cleaned or bloodstained? She repeated, one eyebrow raised. You really know how to make a first impression. Minsu picked up a wrench and looked at it. They talk about peace and philosophy, but they call it battle armor. Why would a purely peaceful philosopher need battle armor? They are asking me to rebuild a weapon, but only if it looks pretty. I was just seeing if they knew that. And? Jihye asked. They don't, Minsu said, putting the wrench down. They have no idea what they are really asking for. They want a story, not the truth. Let's go pack our tools. The journey to the conquered capital was a quiet one. Minsu and Jihye spent most of the time on the Valen ship, looking at the data files Lun provided. The files were full of complex scans and long reports written in the Conquered's flowing, elegant script. They showed the Titan armor from every angle. It stood in a bright white museum room, a giant of dark metal and faded gold lines. It looked powerful, but also silent and still, like a mountain. Minsu scrolled through the reports. Listen to this, he said to Jihye. They describe a crack in the chest plate as aesthetically unfortunate weathering. He shook his head. That's not weathering. Look at the edges. Something hit it. Something big and angry. Jihye nodded, focusing on her own screen. The biological data is the same. They say the internal suit is calibrated for optimal cognitive function, but the readings show nerve connection points designed for massive adrenaline spikes. This thing wasn't built for calm thinking. It was built for fight or flight. For survival. When their ship arrived at the conquered capital, the difference was shocking. Their dusty outpost was forgotten. Here everything was clean and bright. Buildings soared into a sky filled with silent, floating transports. The air smelled of nothing, which was itself a strange smell. The people, mostly Valen and other conquered species, moved with a smooth, quiet grace. There was no shouting, no running, no loud noises at all. They were taken to a special laboratory next to the museum. The lab was even cleaner than the rest of the city. The walls were a soft white, the floor spotless. The air hummed softly with filtering systems. In the center of the room, under a dome of pure energy, stood the Titan armor. It was even more impressive in person. It was tall, taller than two men. The metal was a dull, non-reflective black, scarred and pitted with age. Golden lines, now dark in places, ran across its surface like old veins. It was a thing of war, of raw power. It did not belong in this clean, quiet room. Lun was there to meet them. You have everything you require? They asked. Our most advanced diagnostic tools are at your disposal. Lun pointed to a console with glowing, touchless interfaces. Minsu looked at the fancy console, then at the armor. He walked over to a large case he had brought from his workshop. He opened it. Inside were his own tools, heavy wrenches, solid hammers, rugged scanners with physical buttons and thick cables. Thank you, Minsu said. But I'll start with my own things. They speak the same language as this old fellow. Lun looked at the simple physical tools with clear doubt but said nothing. They left the two humans to begin their work. Minsu's first step was not to turn on a computer. He walked right up to the energy field containing the armor. He reached out, and his hand passed through the field. He placed his palm flat against the cold, black metal of the leg plate. He closed his eyes for a moment. Jihye watched him. She knew what he was doing. He was listening. He was trying to feel the story the metal itself had to tell. He started his work. He ignored the Concord's main power systems. Instead, He attached his own simpler power source to a secondary port he found hidden under a shoulder plate. The conquered engineers had missed it, their scans too focused on the primary, elegant systems. A low, deep thrum filled the room. It was a sound that felt old. A few of the golden lines on the armor flickered, then glowed with a weak, warm light. "It's alive," Minsu whispered. "Just sleeping." For days they worked. Minsu focused on the mechanics. He found that the conquered engineers had tried to fix the power matrix by making it more stable, more efficient. But Minsu saw the truth. The matrix was designed for sudden, massive surges of power, not a steady, gentle flow. It was like a heart built for sprinting, and the Concorde was trying to make it beat like a heart at rest. He began to reroute the systems, using his heavy cables to bypass the refined repairs the Concorde had made. He was not making it more efficient. He was making it more powerful, more raw. Meanwhile, Jihai studied the interior of the suit, the part meant for the pilot. She used her medical scanners to analyze the residue inside. The Concorde reports say the gel layer is for comfort and nutrient supply, she told Minsu one evening. But it's not. It's a chemical cocktail. It's designed to boost aggression, heighten reflexes, and numb pain. This isn't a comfort suit. It's a combat drug dispenser. She also found something else. The helmet's internal display wasn't for showing peaceful philosophy texts. Its core programming was for threat tracking. It could identify, prioritize, and suggest the most efficient way to eliminate multiple targets. One night, Minsu managed to access the armor's deepest memory. The Concorde files called this data corrupted and unrecoverable. But Minsu's methods were less gentle. He fed a strong, direct current into the memory core. A grainy, flickering hologram appeared in the middle of the lab. It was a first-person view from inside the armor. The sound was static and broken screams. They saw a landscape of fire and smoke. They saw other similar armor suits fighting. They saw giant, terrifying creatures with claws and teeth swarming over the Titans. The Titan wearing this armor swung a massive blade of pure energy. They felt the impact through the memory. They saw the view shake violently as the Titan was hit by something. A warning light flashed, red and urgent. It wasn't a philosophical debate. It was a desperate, brutal fight for survival. The hologram faded. Minsu and Jihi stood in silence for a long time. The clean, white lab felt wrong now. It felt like a lie. "So," Jihi said, her voice quiet. "Not peaceful philosophers." "No," Minsu replied, looking at the silent armor. "They were survivors. They were warriors. They fought a war so terrible that their children, the Concorde, decided to forget it ever happened. They scrubbed the history clean." He walked over to the armor and pointed to a deep gash on the forearm. "The Concorde report says this is damage from a long-forgotten geological event." He ran his finger along the mark. "But that's not true. Look at the shape. That was a claw. A very, very big claw." He looked at Jihi, his face serious. "They are asking me to rebuild a weapon, but they want me to pretend it was a piece of art. They see a ceremonial robe. I see a general's battle dress stained with the blood of a war they don't even remember." The task was no longer about fixing an old machine. It was about a choice. Should he give the Conquered the clean, peaceful story they wanted? Or should he show them the bloody, terrifying truth hidden inside the metal? He had asked Loon if they wanted his work cleaned or bloodstained. Now he understood the question was not for his work, but for their history. And the armor itself was telling him the answer. The truth was never clean. The day of the presentation arrived. Minsu and Jihi stood in a large circular chamber deep within the Concorde government building. The room was beautiful, with a domed ceiling that showed a simulated peaceful starscape. The walls were a soft, glowing white. In the center of the room, the Titan armor stood on a platform now looking more alive than it had in the museum. The golden lines on its surface glowed with a steady, warm light. Its internal power thrummed softly, a deep sound that you could feel in your bones. Facing them was the Conquered High Council. There were 5 of them, all Valen like Lun. They sat at a curved table, their silvery faces calm and expressionless. Their long, slender fingers were laced together. Lun stood to the side, their usual calm look touched with a hint of nervousness. Minsu took a deep breath. He began to speak. He explained what they had found. He did not use complex engineering words. He used simple, clear language. "The armor is not just a shell," Minsu said. "It is a weapon system. Its power core does not like to be calm. It is designed for sudden, powerful bursts, like a heart during a fight. He pointed to the armor's arms. These are not just for decoration. They contain hidden weapon ports. The systems are dormant, but they are there. He then nodded to Jihye. She stepped forward. The inside of the suit is the same, she said. The gel is not for comfort. It is a mixture of chemicals. It makes the pilot more aggressive. It makes their reflexes faster. It stops them from feeling pain. The helmet does not show peaceful text. It shows targets. It shows the best way to attack. Minsu brought up a hologram. It was a simple diagram of the armor's core functions. One function was labeled Berserker Protocol. This is the most important part, Minsu said, his voice firm. To truly rebuild this armor, to make it whole, I cannot just make it look pretty. I have to make it work. And to make it work, I have to wake up these systems. All of them. Including the ones built for fighting. Including this one. He pointed at the words Berserker Protocol. The silence in the room was heavy. The council members looked at the diagram. They looked at the armor. Their calm faces began to show cracks. One of them, an older Valen with a deeper silver tone to his skin, spoke. His name was Counselor Valen. These functions you describe, Valen said, his voice cold. They are distasteful. They are primitive. They are everything the conquered has moved beyond. They are a part of your history, Minsu replied. Our history is one of philosophy and order, another counselor, a female named Ilara, said. The Titans were wise guides. They would not have used such brutal tools. The evidence is in the metal, Minsu said, trying to keep his patience. The scratches, the system designs, the memory logs. They fought. They fought for their lives. This armor is proof. Counselor Valen shook his head. You are interpreting the data through your own human lens. Humanity is a young, violent species. You see violence because you expect to see it. You are projecting your own nature onto our peaceful ancestors. Minsu felt a flash of frustration. This isn't about my nature. This is about the truth of what this thing is. You asked me to rebuild it. A rebuild means to make it function as it was designed. It was designed for war. We asked you to restore it, Counselor Ilara said, her musical voice now sharp. To preserve it, not to turn it into a functional weapon of barbarism. Lund stepped forward, their face pleading. Perhaps a compromise. Could you not make the external systems appear whole and functional, but leave the more aggressive internal systems dormant? A symbolic restoration? Minsu looked at Lund, then back at the council. He understood now. They did not want the real thing. They wanted a statue. They wanted a story. They were afraid of the truth. A symbolic restoration, Minsu repeated slowly. You want me to make a copy, a fake. You don't want the ancient armor rebuilt. You want the ancient armor hidden. We want it understood in its proper context, Valen insisted. As a symbol of our peaceful origins. But your origins weren't peaceful. Minsu's voice rose slightly, echoing in the quiet chamber. The council members flinched at the sound. That's the point. This armor isn't a symbol of aggression. It is a symbol of the will to protect something. The will to survive. It is a reminder of the price that was paid for the peace you have today. You've scrubbed that price from your history. You've forgotten what it cost to be safe. His words hung in the air. The council stared at him, their faces a mixture of shock and disapproval. They were not used to being spoken to in this way. They were not used to having their history questioned. Counselor Valen stood up. The human's approach is unacceptable. His methods are crude. His conclusions are tainted by his species' affinity for conflict. The project will be reevaluated. You are to do nothing more to the artifact until we have decided. The council members rose and filed out of the room without another word. Lund stayed behind for a moment, looking from the armor to Minsu. Their expression was troubled. You asked them a question they did not know how to answer, Lund said softly. They didn't even understand the question, Minsu replied, his shoulders slumping. He felt tired. He looked at the powerful, silent armor. He had shown them its heart, and they had called it a monster. He and Jihye were left alone in the beautiful empty room with the giant from a bloody past. The deep thrum of its power core seemed to beat in time with Minsu's own disappointment. He had done what they asked. He had found the truth, and they had rejected it because it did not fit their clean, perfect story. The task to rebuild the ancient armor was over. Now they just had to wait to be sent home. The silence in their guest quarters was heavy. Minsu sat on a sleek, uncomfortable chair staring at the wall. Jihi was quietly packing their few belongings. The order had come down. Their work was suspended. They were to remain in their rooms until the council decided their fate. It was clear they would be sent away, their findings ignored. "We tried," Jihi said, her voice soft. "You told them the truth." "They have ears, but they do not want to hear," Minsu replied. He felt a deep disappointment. It was not about being fired. It was about the armor. It had a story to tell and no one was listening. Suddenly, a low, piercing sound cut through the air. It was an alarm. A red light began to flash on the ceiling. The calm, computerized voice of the station's system spoke, but it was no longer calm. It was urgent. Security breach. Containment level Gamma. All personnel to secure zones. Jihi looked at Minsu, her eyes wide.
"What's happening?"
Before he could answer, their door slid open. Lun stood there. Their silver skin was pale and their usual grace was gone. They looked scared. "The Cathar," Lun said, their voice trembling. "A renegade faction. They have attacked the station. They are heading for the museum wing." The Cathar were a warrior species. They were big, with tough, leathery skin and a reputation for violence. They had never fully accepted conquered rule. They saw the conquered as weak. The legend of the Titan armor was powerful to them. They believed that whoever controlled it had the right to rule. "They want the armor," Minsu said, standing up. "Security is trying to stop them, but—" Lun's sentence trailed off. Conquered security was designed to stop arguments, not a full military assault. The sound of weapons fire echoed from down the hall. It was not the soft hum of conquered stun beams. It was the sharp cracking sound of projectile weapons and the roar of plasma blasts. It was the sound of real war. A sound this peaceful station had never heard. A loud explosion shook the floor. The lights flickered. "They are through the main door to the lab," Lun cried out. "They will be here in moments." Panic was in Lun's eyes. It was the kind of fear that comes from facing something you cannot understand and cannot control. The conquered officials in the hall were frozen. They did not know what to do. Their protocols were useless. This was not a debate, Minsu did not think. He acted. He ran to the large case that held his tools. He ignored the complex devices. His eyes found what he needed: a heavy plasma torch and a long, solid metal wrench. They were simple, physical things. Tools for fixing or for breaking. "Chi, get behind me," he said, his voice low and steady. He stepped out into the hallway. Lun and a few other Valen officials were pressed against the wall, their faces filled with terror. The door to the main lab was a twisted, smoking ruin. Through the smoke, 3 Cathar warriors appeared. They were massive, clad in rough, spiked armor. They carried heavy, brutal-looking rifles. Their eyes glowed with a fierce red light. They saw the group of helpless Valen and snarled, raising their weapons. One of them took aim at Lun. Minsu moved. He did not shout. He did not run. He stepped forward, putting himself between the Cathar and Lun. The Cathar warrior was surprised for a second. This human was not hiding. He was not armed with a proper weapon. He was holding tools. The Cathar fired. Minsu was not there. He had already dropped into a crouch. The plasma blast seared the wall where he had been standing. He moved with a practicality that was terrifying. This was not a dance. It was mechanics. The Cathar was a broken machine and he was going to fix it. He swung the plasma torch. He did not aim for the armored chest. He aimed for the warrior's weapon arm where the armor joints were weaker. The super-hot torch cut through the armor, through flesh and bone. The warrior roared in pain and surprise, his rifle clattering to the floor. Iridescent blue blood sprayed from the wound. The second warrior charged. Minsu didn't back away. He met the charge, dropping low and using the warrior's own momentum against him. As the Cathar stumbled forward, Minsu brought the heavy wrench down with all his strength on the back of the warrior's leg. There was a sickening crunch. The warrior screamed and fell, his leg bending the wrong way. The third warrior was smarter. He circled, his rifle pointed at Minsu. Minsu watched his eyes. He saw the slight tightening before the Cathar pulled the trigger. As the blast left the barrel, Minsu was already moving to the side. The blast grazed his shoulder, burning through his coveralls and searing his skin. He grunted in pain but didn't stop. He threw the wrench. It was not meant to kill. It was a distraction. It hit the Cathar in the faceplate with a loud clang. The warrior flinched. That was all the time Minsu needed. He closed the distance in 2 quick steps and drove the plasma torch straight into the warrior's rifle. melting the barrel. The weapon exploded in the Cathar's hands, throwing him backward. It was over in less than a minute. Minsu stood breathing heavily in the smoky hallway. The 3 Cathar were on the ground, 2 writhing in pain, 1 unconscious. The sharp acidic smell of plasma fire and the coppery scent of blood filled the air. Minsu turned. His coveralls were stained. There was dark smears of soot from the explosion. The iridescent blue of Cathar blood and a patch of shimmering, silvery blood from where Lune had been nicked by a piece of flying debris. Lun was staring at him. The fear was still there, but it was now mixed with something else, a deep, profound shock. They looked from the broken Cathar to the blood-stained human who had, without a single advanced weapon, defeated them. They looked at the pristine Titan armor, still standing silent and unused in its clean lab. And then they looked back at Minsu. He was not a giant in powered armor. He was just a man. His weapon was a tool. His armor was his will. He was breathing hard, his face smudged with grime, his clothes a mess of blood and burns. But he was standing between them and the danger. He had protected them. In that moment, Lun understood. They finally understood the question Minsu had asked back in the dusty workshop. The Conquered had asked for the ancient armor to be rebuilt. But what they had needed was not the relic. They had needed the principle it represented. And this human, with his simple tools and his bloody clothes, had just shown them what that principle truly was. It was not about the weapon. It was about the will to use it to protect others. The choice had been made. The path was bloodstained. The quiet after the fight was almost louder than the battle itself. The alarms had stopped. The sharp smell of fire and blood hung in the air. Concord security forces, now reinforced, moved through the hallway. They tended to the wounded Cathar and led them away. The station medics gently guided the shocked Valen officials to safety. Lun remained, standing frozen near the wall. Their eyes were fixed on Minsu. Minsu was leaning against the doorframe, catching his breath. Jihi was already at his side, using a piece of clean cloth from her pack to put pressure on the burn on his shoulder. His coveralls were a mess of dark soot, bright blue Cathar blood and silvery streaks from Lune's minor cut. He looked tired, but his eyes were calm. He had done what was necessary. The leader of the security team, a Valen with a sterner face than most, approached Minsu. "The station is secure. Your actions prevented a tragedy." The words seemed difficult for the guard to say. They were a confession of failure. Conquered security had failed. A human with a wrench had succeeded. Minsu just nodded, wincing as Jihi pressed on his shoulder. Lune finally moved. They walked slowly towards Minsu, their gaze sweeping over the scene one more time. The scorch marks on the walls, the drops of alien blood on the clean floor, the powerful and silent Titan armor still untouched in its lab, and the blood-stained human who had done its job without it. "You asked me a question," Lun said, their voice quiet. "In your workshop." I did not understand it. Minsu looked up at them. "I understand it now," Lun continued. They pointed a slender finger towards the pristine armor. "We asked for the ancient armor to be rebuilt." Then they pointed at Minsu, at his stained clothes and the simple tools at his feet. But we needed the reminder. The meaning was clear. They had wanted the symbol, but they had needed the spirit. And the spirit did not live in the metal suit. It lived in the will of the person who stood up to fight. A few days later, Minsu's shoulder was healed with Conquered medical technology, leaving only a faint scar. He and Jihi were called one last time to the council chamber. The mood was very different. The council members were not cold or disapproving. They were solemn, humbled. Councillor Valen spoke. "The human Minsu and the scientist Jihi have our deepest thanks. You saved the lives of our people." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "We have reconsidered your findings. Our history, it seems, is more complex than we wish to remember. The Titan armor will remain as it is, a silent monument to a past we must now study with clearer eyes." It was an apology. It was an admission. They would not make the armor functional. They were still not ready for that raw truth, but they would no longer pretend it was something it was not. "You are free to return home," Councillor Alara said, "with our gratitude." As Minsu and Jihi prepared to leave, Lune met them at the landing bay. "There is one more thing," Lune said. "Before you go, please come with me." Lun led them not to their ship, but back to the museum. They walked through the main hall. past the Titan armor which now stood with a new, more honest description beside it. They did not stop there. Lun led them to a new wing of the museum, one that was still being finished. In the center of this new, empty room, a single display stood alone. Inside the display case, under a soft light, was not a suit of ancient armor. It was a set of simple, stained human coveralls. They were the ones Minsu had been wearing. The burn mark on the shoulder was visible. The dark smudges of soot and the patches of blue and silver blood were preserved, not cleaned away. Next to the coveralls on a stand was the heavy plasma torch, its tip still darkened from the fight. And beside it, the long, solid wrench. There was a small, simple plaque at the base of the display. The words were written in the flowing script of the Concord, and below, in simple human text, it read, "The true armor, the unyielding will to protect." Minsu and Ji stood in front of the display for a long time. Minsu looked at his old blood-stained clothes. He thought about the question he had asked. He had not rebuilt the ancient armor. He had done something more important. He had shown them what it really meant. Lun stood beside them. "You asked if we wanted it cleaned or blood-stained," they said softly. "We did not understand the choice, now we do. A cleaned history is a forgotten one. A blood-stained one is remembered. It is a warning and a lesson. Thank you for showing us the difference." Minsu gave a small, slow nod. He understood. The Concord would keep their clean, silent statue, but now they also had a blood-stained, living truth. They would remember the price of peace. He and Ji turned and finally walked towards their ship, leaving the quiet, perfect city behind. The task was complete.